Welcome back to the Business of Becoming. I am your host, Steffany, and if you're new here, I help high achieving people who feel alone at the top find peace, purpose, and the next version of themselves. So today, I want to talk about a topic that honestly grounded the hell out of me in therapy. And I mean, this has been years coming, and I feel like it's so vital because whether you're in business or you're in a relationship or going through a divorce or just kind of going through life and having relationships with people as friends and whatnot, I feel like everyone in this season is kind of going through a moment where they're either trying to reinvent themselves or they're trying to, make their circle bigger, make their circle smaller. And if that's you, I would never want you to feel the way I have felt before, where I've asked myself the question time and time again, like, what's wrong with me? Why do I react this way, or why do I have these feelings? And maybe nothing really is wrong with you. Maybe the way that you have your lens pointed at the situation is what you need to work on and what you need to heal from. So, with all of that being said, I want you to think back. Have you ever had a moment that seems so small on the surface just completely rock you? And it could be something so simple like, a friend didn't text you back, or, after you had conversations with your business partner and then they just went quiet when you needed a decision to be made. Or in a relationship when you're building something with somebody and they're building something with you, and out of nowhere, just something so insignificant happens and it's on surface level, but just completely changes the way or the route that you were on with that person. And maybe somebody again that you were just building life with, or anyone at work or whatnot, they disappointed you. And now that in itself has made you question everything. Question your leadership, question your relationship with this person, question, everything that you thought you already had thus far. Something small, something super insignificant maybe. And again, I don't really genuinely think it's because of what actually happened, that small moment, but maybe it made you question everything because of what it really meant to you. So what am I saying? I'm saying that what if what you're reacting to is not something from just that happened today? What if what you are reacting to is a definition of love or safety or worth that you were kind of either just raised in or self-taught by your experiences? Maybe all of this was created years ago, before you were in business, before you were a parent, before you were in a relationship. And now, when these small things happen, you see it through a completely different lens than somebody else. And again, I think all of this is to remind you and remind everyone who's listening and seeing this video that maybe nothing really is wrong with you. Maybe it's just the lens that you've been looking through. Maybe you haven't questioned the story that you created in your head or in your life, really, because of all the past experiences that you've been through and all the childhood stuff that we never really deal with face to face until we're old or we're having kids and realizing that I don't want to create that same pattern with them. For years, I played this horrible game with myself of, what's wrong with me? Why do I attract this? Am I good enough? Do I have to earn love? Like I have just played this crappy game with myself and just kind of left myself in survival mode for such a long time. And after, trials and challenges, and don't get me wrong, there was a lot of high highs, but then there was a lot of low lows. And in those lows, I just continuously asked myself those questions. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I realized that I was asking myself actually the wrong questions. And You can sit here and you can tell me that, oh, Steph, you listen to all these like self-help, books, and you read them and you listen to all these podcasts, and you encourage people. And yes, I do, because I love to do so. And I know that one of my gifts is to help build people and kind of bring them out of, this, not nothingness, but definitely this mentality and this mindset that has kept them anchored. I know that's my gift, but that doesn't mean that I have not been there multiple times in my life. I'm an overthinker. And when you overthink and you like just hyperfixate on something because all you want to do is find a reason or something to fix so that you can keep going. That's me. That's a high achieving person. That's who I am. But when it got to the point where I got to such a low point in my life where I did need to, seek help and intervene and seek God and just do all of these different things that honestly at that moment I just couldn't do for myself. I realized I was again asking myself the wrong questions. I was not directing really my core to go and seek out the real truth about myself. And the better questions then on became, where did I learn that love was something that I had to earn? That was something that I had to break. It was a challenge. And anybody who's, single, or you've been through a divorce, or you've been through a heartbreak or anything to that matter, I really want to reach out and tell you that maybe it's really not just that you're broken. Maybe it's just that you haven't asked yourself these questions that go to the root of why you continue these patterns in your life. And for me, it was that. It was, I felt that love had to be earned. I felt that there was no real such thing as peace in my life. So I just thrived in chaos. And that's something that I say all the time jokingly. And I used to say it for years. I thrive in chaos because it was the way that I was raised, in a chaos, in a chaotic home and chaotic jobs. And I didn't know where that stability and level, like, mindset was at. It was always just go, 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 go. It was never rest. I felt like I didn't deserve rest. And I've made podcast topics about this multiple times because as a high achieving person, when you have such demand over your life with other people, you realize, or you come to a point where you feel like you don't even deserve rest. How dare you take a vacation? How dare you celebrate your birthday for more than a day? And one thing that blew my mind when I asked myself this was, where did I first learn this? And I remember clearly a moment in my life where I kind of like something switched in me. And I remember hearing somebody say that I respected very much. And they said, well, if you have false expectations for somebody and you have your expectations way too high, it's just going to lead you to offense. And I was super young when I heard that. And I remember hearing it and I said, oh, so I shouldn't have expectations at all for really anybody, because why would I want to put myself in a position where I would be disappointed and offended with them? And I had several friends that I would go out of my way for, and I never expected them to do the same for me because I didn't want to be disappointed. And that was just a way that I kind of just handled myself. I went through business and I went through work and I went through all of these different, stages and situations in my life where it was on me to make it happen. And I didn't give expectations on anybody because I didn't want to be disappointed. But then there was the other side of the coin. Because I never expressed my expectations and I never expressed what I expected from anyone or a friend or a mentor or whatever it was, or even a boss or an employee, when I never expressed that, I found myself in a place where I couldn't express that even romantically of what my expectations were. And let me tell you, dear, if you are listening to this, I'm going to get into this topic real deep, like in a little bit. So give me some time. But if you can't express that, then you a lot of times just end up having a false expectation because, well, that's the way things should be when you're, with somebody. And that's the way things should be when this situation arises. And you don't communicate any kind of expectations at all, but you just set a false one because, well, now you're in a relationship. So you think, okay, well, this is the way typically things should go. And I didn't have the healthiest examples of relationships. So I set false expectations on certain things and it blew up. It definitely blew up in my face. And I just think that happens in just life in general, like with work and with people and friendships. Like when you don't have a clear expectations of what you have in someone that is a close friend, and they don't know that, they don't know your boundaries, then it's not always a ha ha he he moment. There would be moments where they clearly cross something and you need to learn how to communicate that, because my thing was I would just shut off and just disappear. And that was not healthy either. But that was what I was ingrained in because, well, don't set expectations for anybody because you don't want to be disappointed. So let them be them. And if they screw up, then I'm out. And that's super unhealthy. And I'm telling you, I've had to fight with myself. I've lost people in my life and I've reconnected with them, but I've also lost some people that I don't think I could ever repair with certain friends because of these things. We don't experience life the way it happens. We experience life through the meaning that we attach to it. So how can I explain that? I'll give you two perfect examples. One would be you text somebody and they don't text you back. Friend, work, whatever, relationship. One person's perspective can be, oh, well, they're busy. They'll text me when they're available again. Another person's perspective would be, oh, they're ignoring me and I'm not important to them. Another person's perspective would be, oh, snap. They didn't answer something. I did something wrong. The emotional experience behind all of this and all these three different examples I gave you are extremely different. And it's because the meaning is different to that individual. If you don't know this yet, our brain is constantly asking ourselves, like, am I safe? Am I loved? Am I important? Am I good enough? Am I worthy of being here? Whether you could be the most confident person in the world, your brain is constantly just wired to question these things in different situations and experiences. Situations can occur and it'll happen where you can say, what does this mean to me? Or what does this mean about other people that are around me? Like there's those moments in silence where you're going to hear these thoughts. And when these questions occur, this is why it's so pivotal to really start digging deep, because usually we have like automatic filters that go into these things. And it's because of the way that we were raised, or because if we experienced neglect, if we experienced betrayal, if we had trust issues because of certain situations, if we had emotional neglect as a kid, a lot of the times when we ask ourselves these questions, even just in our subconscious, a lot of the times those answers are just people always leave. Love isn't safe. I have to protect myself. And in my case, if someone disappoints me, I have to leave. I have to leave so that I can protect myself and don't give that person another opportunity to hurt me. And this is why healing is so important. It's so important because healing doesn't change what happens. It changes your interpretation of what happens. It doesn't change the behavior. It changes the way you receive it and you react from that. So instead of, hey, this person crossed this line, like, bad on them, shame on them. Yeah, there's some situations where like that line is way too deep. But there's also other times where if you change your perspective and you change your interpretation from what you're looking at, you can say, well, okay, they're human. They made this mistake. And now I got to really communicate on how this affected me. And that was something that took me years. And till this day, I have to force myself, because it's not in my nature to be so openly and vulnerable with the things that I feel are my safety. And this is me being real honest with you guys. There are difficult moments as a mom, you know, difficult moments that I've sat down and I've said, wow, like I didn't realize how much I was coddling, one of my kids or the other one day, and or protecting them from certain situations, that it was because it was my own fears of things that happened. And I was like, I can't make a cycle like this happen again in their lives. And I got to break that pattern. And it was a moment that was tough and it was vulnerable, and definitely with people and friendships and my siblings and relationships, like sharing that vulnerability is part of your healing. Some people, conflict in relationships, that just means it's over, means it's done. And to healthy people can look at conflict and say, okay, well, what are the means for this to be repaired? How can we get stronger from this? Healthy relationships repair. And again, the event hasn't changed. The conflict is still there, but the meaning behind it now has. The emotion behind it now has changed. And I think that is genius if you can master. I feel like you can conquer the world if you can learn how to master these situations and interpret it in a way where your reaction is not one that's automatically inserted from trauma and past hurt and issues. Two people can experience the same childhood and have completely different outlooks on how they were raised. One can say, well, my parents were super chill, super cool. The other one can say, well, they were super strict and they were very hard on us, and they were very, it's just you, if you have siblings, you know that each of your siblings, you all have a different way of how you guys were raised. And all of these experiences that you guys shared could have been filtered through different emotional lenses. One question that can completely change your life is, what meaning am I assigning to this situation right now that may not be true? And I encourage everyone, because I'm about to get that tattooed, because the truth is if you can sit back when something occurs or a situation happens and you can say to yourself, okay, this just happened. What meaning am I going to attach to this, and the emotional, exhaustion that I can attach to this situation that may not be true, And if you can answer those things, then you can already start de-escalating certain scenarios in your head. I know many women that are like crazy, and many men that are insanely jealous and insanely cuckoo in the pants. And I genuinely see so much of their past come up in, certain situations, even at work, or with the way they handle employees. And I don't think a lot of the times people understand that if they were to ask themselves this very important meaning of this very important thing of, what does this mean in my mind right now? What emotion am I attaching to this situation that may really not be true? What am I telling myself or trying to force myself to believe about this situation? You change the meaning, you change the emotion, you change the emotion, you change the behavior, you change the behavior, you change your life. Because now your life is a series of how you behave, how you react. And if you can change all of that, and it starts with one, it's a trickle effect. As you change your behavior, you can start creating a new life for yourself, a life that you deserve, a life where you do become better and a better version of yourself. As humans, we don't respond to reality itself. We don't respond to things that automatically, come up and pop up. We respond to a story that we've convinced ourselves to believe is our reality. The real healing begins when you get curious about the story that you're telling yourself and start trying to pick at it and say, is this really the truth of this situation? Is this really the truth about my life? So, kind of going back a little bit to what I was saying of asking yourself those questions, like, what does safety mean to you? You know, what does success look like to you? What does loyalty look like to you? What does being ignored or, you know, having a partner, what does all of that mean to you? A lot of the times they're just invisible definitions that are running our lives, you know, because we assume that everybody has the same understanding of what loyalty is, the same understanding of what trust is, or the same understanding of what a partnership is in business. And most of us have never stopped to answer these questions for ourselves. So what happens? If I define success one way and my business partner defines success another, we might not be compatible. We might not be successful in the way we see each other. You know, when it comes to work, if they have a completely different definition of success, a lot of the times it's really difficult to partner with people that don't have the same mindset as you. Because at that point, you guys are driving different paths. And no matter how much I can prove myself or how much my partner can prove themselves, it'll never be my definition of success. If you define love and loyalty as never disappointing somebody, then you will be exhausted and you will not be able to sustain a marriage. You will not be able to sustain a love life. You will not be able to sustain even parenting because you will disappoint your kids. I tell you, every day. And my son is in summer camp right now, and every day it's a disappointment that he has to go to summer camp. It's like the world is ending because he has to go to summer camp. It's a disappointment that he has, but I don't define love like that. I define love as saying, well, I'm going to give you an experience whether you like it or not. And later we can talk about it, but it's an experience I want to give to my kids. And you will be exhausted if you define love as never disappointing somebody or loyalty or trust as that, because trust especially cannot be defined as never disappointing somebody because you will be exhausted trying to keep everyone happy. You cannot sustain a business trying to keep everybody happy. And for my control freaks, just like I've been, if you define safety as being able to control and know what's going to happen, your life and your business will constantly feel threatened because there's no way in hell that you can control what life throws at you. And there is no way in hell that you can control your business and how it's going to run and success or failures. Like, you can control to very minute, very, very little things you can control to help it. But you cannot control what happens when you put it out there in the world, because uncertainty is part of both. Uncertainty is part of doing life and business. It's a risk. And I'm going to get vulnerable here. So so I didn't understand what safety or emotional safety really was for me. I thought I had this understanding of what it looked like or what it should be, but after years of realizing that I really didn't have an answer for myself, and I kept repeating certain cycles and certain patterns in my life, in all facets, in relationships and friendships and business, I realized that I didn't really know what emotional safety was for me. I didn't have an outline for it. And then I really sat with this question of how in the world can I expect myself to get into another relationship or get into another business or get into having people, because business is like marriage, guys. It is like marriage when you partner up with somebody. How can I go through all of this and not know what this safety feels like or what this emotional safety is for me? Because if I don't know, how the heck is the other person on the other side going to know? And when I dug deep and started asking myself these questions, I really realized that it wasn't even my postpartum. It wasn't my divorce. It wasn't my heartbreaks after. It wasn't any of that stuff. It wasn't none of that. The root of me not knowing what emotional safety was, or not being able to express that, was stuff from my childhood, was stuff from before any of those things existed, or before any of those versions of myself existed. And I realized how many times I just disconnected, or I didn't handle it in any way, or I felt disappointed, really, with the other person on the other side, or, in work or whatnot. Like, I felt disappointed, and I would just be like, oh, how could you? You know better. But then I was like, wait, when I actually sat down and started asking myself these questions, I was like, did they even know that that was a boundary they shouldn't cross? Right? Some of them did. But in some instances, kind of like going back to what I had said earlier, where maybe it was something so superficial, so surface level, but my emotional triggers just ran and said, "Oh my gosh, like how could they do that?" Right? Maybe you have a business partner that they talked about something that was meant for, or that you thought that it was something that was in private, and they shared it with the rest of the staff, and you were just like, "How dare they?" But did you ever set the boundaries and the emotional part to it, saying that don't cross that line? Here's one thing I noticed in high achievers. I've noticed that in high achievers, when it comes to life, or when it comes to relationships, or when it comes to businesses, we don't like to quit. I've noticed that in my business multiple times. There's been situations where there's just no more to defend this file. We have to send it off to the next step. And I've seen that in high achievers, that we don't like to quit. We don't like to feel like we failed. We want to keep fighting and keep trying. And our whole identity as high achievers is we want to win. We want to achieve. We want to get a gold star. We want to get, something more than just a participation trophy. And that's often why a lot of the times we stay much longer in things than we should. Sometimes we try and push for people, for example, employees. I've had multiple where I've just pushed and pushed and pushed. And yes, there could be a good thing in that, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes they should have been let go 2 years ago, and we've pushed for bigger meetings and big boardrooms, when in reality, it's not really a win for us. It's just a win in our mind, because we don't want to feel like we failed. And again, like our identity is based off of like figuring things out, making it happen. And when we can't, it feels like a failure. It feels like that problem that you couldn't solve, or you couldn't work out, or you couldn't help. And many high achievers, we find ourselves really having this savior complex. And I know this very well. This savior complex is this unconscious, because it's really not like you don't wake up and say, I'm a savior. Like, no. But this savior complex is kind of just this unconscious mental state or belief in the fact that we need to help fix and make things happen, and burden ourselves to be somebody's savior. And that our worth comes from rescuing people and fixing things for them, and just putting that on us, and taking all of that and putting it on us and fixing it. And from there, we find our worth. And please don't cross the wires. It is not about being compassionate. It's not only about being compassionate. Let me put it that way. It's about believing that someone else's well-being is now your responsibility. And my God, have I found myself there so many times in my life. It shows up in relationships, in business, in parenting, in friendships. I mean, in relationships, it sounds very similar to what you'll hear. And I'm more than sure that Taylor Swift has quoted this. Um, I love him, he'll change. I can help him. I can fix him. If I love them enough, they'll figure it out and they'll change. In parenting, it could also sound like, if my child is struggling, like, I failed. If they can't get into this school, or they can't be on par with the rest of the students around them, then I've failed them. Or if they can't make it on a team, I failed them. And in business and in leadership, oh, like it just sounds like if my team is failing, if we're not hitting the numbers, then I just got to do it myself. And the common thread in all of these things is that instead of propelling people and having them actually stand up and do it for themselves, we start carrying them. And many people learn this pattern in their life. Many people learn this pattern in their life very early on. That we had to earn, love, or that we had to stay quiet to keep the peace, or we had to take care of everything. Sorry. And over time, like helping becomes more of like an identity than it is even a choice. The problem with this is that if we stay in the savior complex and we stay in trying to fix everything for everyone, then we will only attract that in our lives. And we will dismiss those that are willing to walk alongside you rather than you being the one pulling them and carrying them over your shoulders to get to the end game that you want to be at. Healthy leadership, healthy parenting, healthy relationships, they all require these two things. Support without carrying somebody. Love without having the need to rescue. And lead without having to control. If you can have these three mental shifts, you would be a healthier parent, a healthier partner in business or in relationships, and a healthier friend. And now, with all of that being said, I want to tell you about this broken plate theory that completely rocked me and really forced me to make this episode and give you guys a different perspective, a visual perspective of what I'm actually talking about. For a long time, I thought I was super good at protecting my peace. I thought that I was actually genius for it. If someone crossed the line and someone disrespected me, or someone did something that I was just, it's completely like crossed my boundary, I would just disconnect, completely disappear. I would completely erase them from my life. I didn't yell. I didn't really argue. I would just kind of slip back and just say, not worth my time, not worth my effort. And I truly believed that was like a huge step in emotional maturity because, I didn't want to be the person to nag. And I didn't want to be the person that was always talking about what hurt them. I just thought, hey, this doesn't work for me and I'm done. This is not a friendship that I want, or this is not a partnership that I would want to be in. And then one day, I was asked a very difficult question when someone asked me how I protected my peace. And I said, yeah, no, somebody crosses it, it's done. Like, I got time to waste. I'm a single mom. I got 2 kids, like whatever. Right. And when they asked me that, they said, okay. They said, do you think you were protecting your peace or your wounds? And I honestly felt like the mic dropped in that moment. Because protecting your peace and obviously protecting your wounds are 2 completely different things. And then I just started asking myself, and I went down the spiral of like, why is it so easy for me to disconnect then? Why is it so easy for me to just detach? And why do I assume that some painful moments in business or relationship is just, it's not safe anymore? It's automatically my assumption. And then I had this person tell me, well, if they crossed the boundary, were you ever clear with what that boundary was? Or were you ever clear to communicate with them what was emotionally safe for you? And how to repair that if they crossed it without knowing. And I realized that I just genuinely had that false expectation for people or employees or, relationships, friendships, the whole nine. I had this false expectation that I didn't think I had. I just thought that was the status quo, And some things are, like cheating, adultery, like all this. Those are the status quo. Hitting, like all of those things are like, no. But there's certain things that are surface level that maybe they were a big boundary for me, but they weren't for them. and they didn't know. So she gave me an example of, and she told me, well, if they didn't know and you didn't communicate that they crossed the boundary, you just either disappeared or just kind of like were done with it. Did you explain how to repair it? And I was like, no, obviously I didn't. And she told me something that changed my life. And she said, how do you expect somebody to hold a broken plate and not get cut? And that, I mean, I was crying at that point. And I don't really do that, but I did, because I was like, man, I can totally see how unfair I had been in certain situations. I could totally see how unfair, I could have been to those who were trying to care, or to even, business friends, all that stuff. I can totally see where me not communicating certain ways of where my safety was and how to build it or protect it or whatever. For some things that are superficial, right? Some things that are just like nothing crazy, I can see where you can build resentment. And I think that that's something that so many of us haven't really caught onto, that there may be areas in your life and there may be relationships in your life that don't have to be romantic. They can be professional. They can be the greatest professional things that are going to give you, incredible success. But if you do not take a moment to actually express where your safety is and what lines not to cross, and if it does happen for whatever reason, how to communicate, hey, this is how you can rebuild that. Like, if you don't know that for yourself, nobody is going to know it for you. And they're just going to have another false expectation for you. And it's false expectation versus false expectation. And you guys are going to fail. And you're going to end up getting hurt, and you're going to lose friendships. You're going to lose relationships. And you might miss out on success because you don't know how to clearly express certain boundaries that are important to you. And again, it's not to say that there aren't boundaries that are just clear as day, that you don't really need to express all the time, right? Or that you need to lay out. But sometimes we can confuse something very simple, and we can ask ourselves a question like, are they violating a boundary, or are they actually touching a wound right now? A boundary can really just signify like, this behavior isn't safe for me. And then a wound is going to say, oh, this is familiar. Oof. He's just like the last one. Or, this person, they're going to make the same mistakes as the last person that was in their role, or they're not going to catch on to the system quickly enough. Like, we gotta dish them out. Like, wounds just feel familiar. Boundaries are you clearly saying, this is not healthy for me. And there's a statement that says, what once protected us can eventually limit us if we don't question it. And I thought that through in a variety of ways, because I've told you guys multiple times, I'm a, younger sibling, whatnot. And in order to protect the peace in my upbringing, I just had to kind of stay quiet. I couldn't choose the movie. I couldn't choose what was on the radio. I couldn't choose what was on the TV. It was just like, all right, you know what? I'm just done. I don't want to fight. Like, you guys do it. It is what it is. And that protected me for my youth. It prevented me from getting my ass whooped. But growing up, keeping quiet was limiting to me. I needed to stand up for myself in certain situations. I needed to stand up because I wanted to work and I wanted to be in business. And if I stayed quiet, it would have limited me completely. And although I have opened up several facets of my life to not stay quiet, right? Because I'm not protecting that old version of me anymore. I'm now standing up for myself, and I have a voice, and I've been very successful to try and do so, and all this other fun stuff. But then, because these are things that have happened in my past and were from such a young age, that was like a trigger in my mind that that's what safety was, right? I realized in certain facets of my life, I still had the same behavior. I still had the same behavior, and I was completely different, in a workspace or whatnot. But then with certain friends or certain people, I was a different person. Like I would just stay quiet and just say, well, whatever. And that's so limiting, because it carries into your parenting and carries into your future relationships. And communication is obviously the biggest key of your life to actually have success and to have growth. And I think the biggest check mark for me was, is the response that I'm giving the situation protecting me or protecting the version of myself of when I was younger, or the version of myself that had to survive this situation or this youth? Like, I don't know about you guys, or I don't know who's listening, but when I was going through my divorce, and it was tough. Like, I had to completely disconnect and just completely go quiet. And after most of this process, I've had to really question myself and say, am I protecting myself, or am I just trying to survive? And I think that's a big deal for many of us to just kind of ask ourselves that questions. One of the biggest questions that we can really answer for ourselves and change our entire lives is to just say, like, answer what is safety for me? What does safety look like for the home that I'm trying to build, the life that I'm trying to build? What does safety look like for the business and the career that I want? The greatest gift that we can give ourselves is understanding that we're not perfect and that we're emotional creatures, men and women. And we need to know what our emotional safeties are. We need to know that we're not broken, but that we just need to understand ourselves better. We're not broken. We're really just misunderstood. We need to become people who can communicate our needs and communicate what matters to us, to our team, to our business partners, to our relationships, because we can't expect people to be mind readers. We don't want to be mind readers, so we can't expect people to be that for us. We need to be the people who can understand the difference between a boundary and a wound. We need to understand that a boundary, you need to honor those. You need to treat them with respect. And wounds, we need to heal. We need to heal our wounds because we've all got them. Nobody is safe from them. And that, my friend, is emotional maturity, is understanding that we're all healing individuals that are all kind of a little afraid to be vulnerable with others, but understanding that that risk can bring the highest reward. And emotional maturity really is, to me, if you ask me now, is understanding and knowing that I have wounds and that I need healing, and that everyone out there in the world is just living life the same way. Some are surviving and some are realizing that they have wounds and trying to heal them. And if I want to continue being emotionally mature, then I need to pinpoint where those wounds are and actually start healing them. And that's exactly what I want for you as my listeners. I want you guys to know where your wounds are, know where the triggers are, and start finding ways to heal yourself so you do not repeat cycles and patterns in your life that cause you to live a life where you were constantly surviving, where you were constantly treading water. I'll leave you with this. Maybe really nothing is wrong with you. Maybe you just have a different definition of what love and success and worth really mean. Maybe you lived with a reality that you were brought up in, or that you had to learn to survive in. And instead of asking yourself, what the hell is wrong with me? Ask yourself, where did I learn this was my truth? Where did I first feel like this was my reality? And do I still want to live by this definition? Because becoming is not creating a brand new person, a brand new persona. It's about uncovering all of these beliefs that were ingrained in us to make ourselves believe this was our reality. This was what love was supposed to look like. This was what trust and, loyalty looked like. And we need to uncover the fears of abandonment. We need to uncover the fears of rejection and betrayal and trust issues, and really start peeling back those layers of onions and giving ourselves the chance now as adults to heal. Because that is healing, is looking at all of these things and opening all of these doors and saying, oh man, that's why I thought that I wasn't good enough. And then starting to rewrite that narrative and see yourself clearly, because that is healing. If this episode landed with you and it spoke to you, I really encourage you to like and subscribe, number one. And number two, send it to somebody that you think has been living in survival mode, or maybe has a different interpretation of what or who they are, you know? Like you see them one way and they see themselves in the complete opposite way. And if you feel like they need it, I would encourage you to send it to them, because there's a lot of people in my life that I look at them and I'm like, man, you guys are freaking awesome. You're amazing. And they see themselves so different. And sometimes we just need to check. Maybe we have some wounds we need to heal. And I would love to hear your thoughts and your comments. So drop them down, and I will see you guys on this chair next week.